We've shown a lot of rifle builds here on Ultimate Reloader. In this video, we're going to talk about all of the skills, machinery, tools, and equipment you're going to need to chamber rifle barrels and how much it's going to cost. Gavin here from UltimateReloader.com. This video is brought to you by the Colorado School of Trades, one of the few places you can go in the United States to study gunsmithing both in the classroom and hands-on with instructors doing things like chambering rifle barrels at the lathe, doing stock work at the milling machine, doing hot tank bluing. Lots of stuff you can study at the Colorado School of Trades that directly relates to what we're going to talk about in this video. If you want to know more, visit schooloftrades.edu or call 303-233-4697. This video is also brought to you by OTM Tactical. We've got a UR5 discount code you can use at otmtactical.com where you'll find barrel blanks, triggers, actions, and more. Now on with the video. So as we start to unravel everything you need to chamber rifle barrels, this is precision rifle building, right? We're not talking about casual work, but real bench rest quality, world-class rifle gunsmithing. We're going to start with yourself, you as a person, the skills and the knowledge you have. When I think about a rifle smith, I think about someone with a very particular disposition. Some attributes you're going to need to be a successful rifle smith would include extreme patience. There's a lot of learning and just a lot of process that goes sometimes very slowly. Sometimes things need to be done multiple times. It's all really about going the extra mile. I'll give you an example. When I'm chambering a rifle barrel, I'll check for run out multiple times. If I'm using pressure flush, that means plugging up the bore, means cleaning out the chamber, and then getting the instruments out to check for run out. That takes a lot of extra time, but that patience pays off. Persistence, right? In the learning process, in the work, you have to be very, very persistent because things don't always go the way that you expect them to go. And it really takes a lot of time and follow through to gain the skills and to perfect your abilities as a rifle gunsmith. Focus. When I'm chambering a rifle barrel, I tend not to have music on. I tend not to have, podcasts on or anything. And I try and work with my team here at Ultimate Reloader to make sure that I'm not interrupted during the critical portions of that work. There's a lot of mental math going on if you're running a manual machine, which is what the focus is going to be for this entire video. We're not going to get into CNC, which is a great extension of using manual machines to do this kind of work. Attention to detail. You really need to be very detail-oriented, to write things down, to keep good records, and to follow meticulous processes from start to finish without skipping any important steps or details. Manual dexterity, this is a great one. I actually included the definition here. Manual dexterity is someone's ability to use the hands to perform a difficult task or action skillfully and quickly so that it looks easy. This is the perfect definition of a riflesmith working at a lathe. Mechanical inclination is something that's really hard to quantify, but is also important. If you've grown up working on cars, you're going to have a leg up. If you've torqued a bolt to the point of it snapping and you know what that process feels like to yield and you have a good gut sense for how things go together, what is tight enough, right? Even without a torque wrench, that's just going to serve you really, really well. And then problem solving. If you're not a good problem solver, it will be very difficult to get through certain types of work. Some of this has to do with, okay, I'm going to take the rifle apart. The barrel won't come off. What's next? What's my next move to get this barrel off? Extreme leverage, torque, different types of barrel vices and action wrenches, right? It could be, I need to make an extractor cut and I only have limited tooling here available on hand. How am I going to use my milling machine and a right angle cutter, for instance, to do this sort of work? And maybe it's, I have a bit of reamer chatter that I need to take out, and the different types of strategies that you can use with putting patches over the reamers or wax paper or whatever it happens to be to get things back under control. Problem solving can be very challenging and it can be very rewarding too when you can use those skills and put them to use. Okay, The second part is kind of the general skills and training. You know, once you've self-assessed, you know, your kind of core disposition and your personal attributes, you know, riflesmithing may be something you'll either love or hate, right? Now it's time to talk about how are you going to get skilled up for this, right? The gunsmithing and firearms training, if you can go to a school like the Colorado School of Trades, that will definitely help fast track a lot of this knowledge, because they've got a whole portfolio of instructors, right? A whole group of instructors, a faculty there that a lot of them have 40 plus years experience each, and you can leverage that body of knowledge and put it to use right then and there. I think I'm a little jealous of people that were able to go through those types of trade schools because of just the broad variety of different skills and background knowledge that you're going to accrue and learn. Machining skills, this is super, super important. I'm right now in the process of looking for a gunsmithing machinist for our shop, and the ability to run a lathe, to turn really accurate threads, to not make mistakes, you know, when working at the lathe and doing these types of machining processes is super, super important. And it also has to do with, you know, the ability of that person to not wreck the machine and to do work efficiently, right? So lathe skills and mill skills is totally a prerequisite to doing this. You know, I had started running lathes in the 80s. I also ran lathes when I was going through mechanical engineering school, bought my own lathes, ran them for years before I even thought about starting. Not to say that you can't start from scratch, but just expect to do a lot of machining on plastic and aluminum, threading, fitting, measuring, you know, doing all of that work to the point where you're really confident and things are muscle memory before you go to start chambering rifles. Math and visualization skills is just absolutely critical. You got to be able to think in 2D and 3D and do a lot of addition and subtraction and dealing with tolerances, dealing with lengths and different offsets, right? The end of the barrel tenon is one reference point. The shoulder is another reference point. And to be able to make sure that you've got all of the right allowances and the correct headspace and so on and so forth. Trig is a key part of that, right? When we're coming in at 29 degrees, making a cut, doing threading, we're looking at a linear measurement at an angle, and that has a certain influence on the diameter, right? So when I'm using my thread micrometers, I've got a table of trig that I have generated and that I use, right? And if needed, I can do trig calculations. It's not super complicated, but you definitely need to be confident that your math is correct so that your result is correct. And that's part of what is kind of a split thing about rifle gunsmithing. On the one hand, it's a craft where you can't make mistakes, right? Customer waited for a year for his barrel, and you can't screw up that barrel blank, right? Once you've cut it to length, you need to do the job and need to feel confident in doing that job without making a mistake. Otherwise, it'd be very, very, very unpleasant. And there's a downside to that. The upside to that is that makes this really exciting work, right? It's like going in and doing heart surgery, right? Failure is not an option. It's mission critical. We're doing ultra precise work with our hands. That's the kind of work that I derive satisfaction from. The ability to read prints and technical drawings and even generate them is also important. When I do a chambering job on something that I haven't documented yet, I'll typically print out the SAMI print for it, the cartridge and the chamber specifications, and then I'll also go to the rifle action manufacturer and print out their tenon print. Now I have all of the basic information that I need to put something together. Now, if you don't have a tenon print from the action manufacturer, which is frequently the case with barrel work in a shop, you're going to need to create your own diagram, and you're going to need to take the measurements so that you know what all the key dimensions are going to be for that rifle barrel job as you go to do the work. Getting ready to chamber and chambering and so on and so forth. And then general knowledge of bolt action rifle systems and how they work. And that will translate to an easier time reading some of these prints and diagrams and mentally knowing where you need to go with the different cuts and machining processes, and to have that ability to bring it all together. Okay, so that's kind of you as a person and the skills that you're going to need to accrue and develop and refine. Next is something that I'm not going to include in any of the pricing or what's the total cost to the barrier to entry, right? The facility, insurance, and licensing is a very real thing. We have shop space that we rent, and we rent it in town here. We do rifle gunsmithing sometimes up at the mountain ranch at Ultimate Reloader, but we can't get packages up there, and we needed an FFL address where we could conduct business. We do not have three-phase power at our current location, and we were quoted somewhere around $30,000 just to get that run into the building. That doesn't include the panel. That doesn't include wiring in the shop or anything, pretty expensive. So if you can find a place to rent that already has three-phase power, that's going to be pretty amazing. One of our larger lathe has three-phase. Our middle-sized lathe can use either three-phase or single-phase, right? But there's a lot of equipment out there where it's really nice to have that three-phase power, especially if you're buying older industrial equipment. You're going to want to check your voltage as well. If it's 480 volt or 203 or whatever the voltage happens to be. If you don't have three-phase power, you can always use a rotary phase converter, or there are new digital solutions as well. Just know that's an additional cost that you're going to need to factor in. If your lathe has a 5 horsepower main motor, you're going to need at least a 10 horsepower rotary phase converter to give you a rough idea. You can take that motor horsepower on the machine and kind of multiply by 2 to get an approximate idea. More is better in that case, just like with a tow vehicle. You're going to need a vault and a security system. In our state and here in Washington, we've got new guidelines and requirements that have come down that are pretty stringent and are costly. So, mandatory security features, mandatory storage of security footage, and so on and so forth. Obviously, an office and a showroom where you can invite customers in and check in their rifles and plan their builds. Insurance is a really, really big deal. It is not cheap. And it's difficult to get as well. So that is its own thing. And then there's the licenses, right? Your federal firearms license is a part of it, and then you're going to have to decide what type of license to get. A manufacturer's license is the appropriate license for a rifle gunsmith, because you're going to be assembling rifles, putting them together, giving them a cartridge designation, and so on and so forth. We have our SOT, so we can manufacture suppressors, we can deal in suppressors and do other things as well. That is not necessary for a typical rifle barrel shop. Okay, let's get into machinery, and then we'll go into tools and supplies. So the main piece of machinery in a gunsmithing shop for rifle barrel work is a metal lathe. And again, we're going to talk about manual machinery for all this, which you're going to want in the shop anyways. A great addition to that can be CNC equipment for different things. And that's something that we're looking into right now for our shop. So things to look for in a lathe in general. Precision, right? We work with Precision Matthews equipment. Every lathe that I've tested has been amazing right out of the crate. Large diameter spindle is going to allow you to get large diameter barrels, and in some cases, even part of the rifle action into the spindle, or the entire rifle action. Our larger lathe, especially if we remove triggers, we can typically get an entire barreled action all the way through the spindle. Pretty amazing, even with the recoil lug sticking down. And that just is less hassle. We can do jobs quicker. In a lot of cases, we don't need to remove barrels because of that when we're threading muzzles. And that means we don't need go, no-go gauges for these odd calibers that come through, and cartridges that come through the shop here and there. So a large diameter spindle is great, and the shorter, the better. We have 3 lathes right now we're using for chambering, and they have 3 different lengths. And if we're running into a tight issue with a shorter barrel where we need to thread the muzzle or whatever, we're going to pick the shortest spindle. I had to do that just the other day. Our PM 1440 GT is kind of the rock star for that. Okay, the swing, the diameter of what can be turned on the lathe is not super critical. Usually it's going to be more than what you need, but the length between centers is, pictured here is my PM 1660 TL, and I love this thing. A lot of gunsmiths would use the 40-inch between centers version. This is the 60-inch between centers version, and that just means I have a lot more room. When I'm working with ELR barrels, sometimes these are 40 inches long, right? So if your distance between centers is 40, that doesn't give you any extra working room with tooling and stuff like that. So 40-inch between centers is totally adequate. 60 is a nice to have. I know for Precision Matthews, for this particular machine, that requires a different truck to bring it to the shop, so the freight charges are a lot more on a 60-inch machine. So trade-offs for sure. Okay, weight, mass, rigidity is incredibly important. You can't get too much rigidity, and a metal lathe can't be too heavy to do good work. Those factors will help you in all cases. Now, in many cases, you can get by with a smaller machine, but you might have to take lighter cuts, and you might prefer to do certain things off the lathe, like chopping the barrel down. Parting is more difficult on lighter duty lathes, and it is a lot easier and less trouble prone on heavier, more rigid machines because you get less chatter and less parting blade breakage and so on and so forth, right? So these are things that you definitely want to think about. And then also parts, repairs, and support. Precision Matthews is a great company to deal with. They are really good about supporting their machines from a technical advisement standpoint, helping you get things set up, helping you troubleshoot, but also parts and repairs and so on and so forth. And these machines that we have are all made in Taiwan. They're not made in China, so the level of quality is that much better. Okay, so here is our chambering lathes at Ultimate Reloader. We started with the PM1440 GT. It's got an over 2-inch spindle capacity. It's the diameter of the inside of the spindle, and the spindle length is 15.5 inches. Now that's where the chuck mounts. So you've typically got more length due just to the length of the chuck itself. But you can see here in a relative sense, we've got 15.5 inches length on the PM1440 GT. Our newest lathe, the PM1440 HVT2, has the same diameter spindle, but it's a little bit longer, almost 2 inches longer. And then the PM1660 TL, the picture here is the 40-inch version. We have the 60-inch version, right? It's got a 24-inch long spindle, so it's almost 10 inches longer than the PM1440 GT, but it has 2.550 inches capacity, which is really, really helpful when you've got a rifle action that you need to send through the spindle. You know, and if you're using a 6-jaw chuck and you've got articulation separate from an outboard spider, you can definitely, you know, get away with that, and that is a huge help. So there's definitely trade-offs here with the spindle length and the spindle diameter and what kind of a chucking and indication setup that you're running on the lathe, that sort of thing. But the 1660 TL weighs a lot. I think it's about 4,000 pounds net just for the machine, whereas the other two machines are more in that 1,800 to 2,800 pound range. So that extra mass, it helps when things are running slightly off center, which you'll need to do when you're indicating barrels to get the interior bore aligned. Not everything might be running perfectly in balance, right? A heavier machine gives you more resilience against those sorts of vibrations. Okay, so the lathe is one thing, but then there's a lot of things that you need for the lathe that are either bolt-on accessories or are other components that may or may not come with the lathe, right? A good 3-jaw chuck and a good 4-jaw chuck are absolutely mandatory. Outboard spiders, in the cases of the lathes that I have here, these are things that I've custom designed and fabricated. Some lathes that you'll find will come with them, but that'll give you the ability to support the barrel either with or without a barrel extension on the outboard side. So you'll either keep it from flopping around, or you'll actually steer the barrel and perhaps use a 4-jaw chuck with some pivoting pads so that you can dial the barrel angle in correctly and so on and so forth. I have a barrel flush, pressure flush system for the TL1660, and that is a really nice system to have when you need it, but also requires more setup time and cleanup time. So I tend to use it mostly for the larger cartridges where a manual plunge and reamer clean is a little bit more time consuming and perhaps not as convenient. Reamer holders, there's many different styles. I'm currently running rigid reamer holders that are machined in place from machinable blanks with the appropriate Morse taper, and that's working really well. It's a bit more exacting, and you might need multiple reamer holders for different subtle variations in reamer shank diameter, so that's another consideration. There's floating holders, there's fixed holders. I tend to like the rigid holders because they cut a little bit better and ensure proper alignment, even if your tailstock is high or low. Tailstock DRO is another really helpful thing. Basically, the strategy there is to lock the saddle in place and to have your tailstock come up against a hard stop on the saddle to the same exact relative location each time, and then to use the tailstock DRO, which is basically like a digital caliper scale but custom built, to track your relative depth for drilling or for reaming. A really, really nice thing to have. Okay, now shifting gears to the milling side. Technically, you can do a lot of rifle barrel work without a milling machine, but there are cases where you're going to be chambering rifle barrels and you kind of need to have one, like a Mauser style action or a Ruger M77, where you've got an extractor on the side and there you have got to make a cut in the end of the barrel shank, the tenon, so that that extractor has a place to go, a little recess there. If you're going to be fluting barrels, right? Or if you've just done a barrel job and the barrel diameter is larger, profile is fatter, and you need to do a little bit of inletting work on the stock for that barrel channel to preserve your free float, right? These are all cases where you're going to need a milling machine. Here I have the PM949 TV from Precision Matthews, which is a 9-inch by 49-inch table Bridgeport clone. And regardless of what mill you have, I highly recommend that you get a DRO. It's much more important than the DRO on a lathe, in my opinion. It just makes using it a lot quicker and easier. And you know, you can go with a knee mill, whether it be a Bridgeport clone or another style, or a bench mill. We have the PM728 VT, which is a really nice small Taiwanese machine. All the mills are also Taiwanese that we have from Precision Matthews. X-axis travel is really important, especially if you're doing stock work. And you know, the longer the table and the longer the travel, the more inconvenience you'll have kind of going between the different handles for the different movements on it. So the size comes with advantages and disadvantages. Talking with Gordy Gritters, he likes smaller machines when he's doing a lot of his stock work for that reason. But the flexibility of a Bridgeport clone is kind of hard to beat. Finally, in terms of machinery, we have the bandsaw. I have a bandsaw like this at each of my locations. This is the PM712G horizontal vertical bandsaw. You can flip it up vertical and put a little table on it and send stock through it. But most of what we do is cut down barrels with this. And you know, if I'm on a really rigid lathe like the 1660, I will just use a parting blade and part it off. That's not a problem. On the breech end, it's still probably quicker and easier to just hack it down on the bandsaw. But quite frequently on the muzzle side, I'll just part on the lathe. With the smaller lathes, the 1440 lathes, I'll typically do either end on the bandsaw first, throw it in the lathe, and then basically face it down to length because it's just less stressful. These lathes can definitely part off barrels, but you have to make sure that your parting blade is absolutely perpendicular to the spindle axis and to make sure that you're right on center and that you're using cutting oil and you're feeding at the appropriate rate and the barrel is secured in the chuck jaws super well, right? That's just on a smaller lathe, sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth. So we use our bandsaw all the time in the shop. We use it for a bunch of other things, but it's mostly used just for cutting down barrels. Okay. Moving on from the machinery to the tools, the precision measurement tools are kind of like the core valuable investment that you're going to make in your machinist tool chest. And typically what I have at each lathe is a set of 0 to 6 inch digital calipers, quick measurements, whether it be diameters or depths or lengths, a set of OD micrometers, right, outside diameter, 0 to 1 inch and 1 to 2 inch. And I'm running digital on basically all these where appropriate because it's really easy to switch between inch and metric, and it's really easy to take relative measurements by zeroing at a particular length or diameter. Okay, and then like I've got a 0 to 1 and a 1 to 2 for OD general, I've also got a 0 to 1 and a 1 to 2 thread micrometer set at each lathe. I'm running these analog because digital threading micrometers are insanely expensive. I tried a cheaper set, they didn't work too well, but these analog thread micrometers that I've got have been working really well and are really accurate. So I have a couple sets of those, and they are a great alternative to something like the 3-wire method, where you put a couple wires on one side of the threads and one on the other. You take an OD micrometer measurement, you got to do a bunch of math, and it's just a hassle. It's totally unnecessary, in my opinion. We've got a digital depth micrometer, typically running 0 to 1. You can get some that have different rods for 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on and so forth. I don't particularly like to have to swap those around and check calibration. So I'd almost rather have a couple depth micrometers if I need different depth ranges, and then just keep those set up and calibrated next to the lathe. Thread pitch gauges, just a small tool that you're going to use to double check your action or your muzzle threads or breech threads that you're either cutting or from your takeoff barrel, just to make sure that everything is set up properly on the lathe and that you know exactly that you've confirmed what you're doing for a particular job. 0 to 1 inch 1/1000th indicator and base is great for getting barrels dialed in at the breech end and at the muzzle end. And then a 10th indicator, dial test indicator, which is a different style, 1/10,000th of an inch resolution and corresponding base. And there's different styles. Typically the 10,000th indicator, I'm running a nodding holder for the dial test indicator. And then for the 1,000th indicator, I've got a base with an adjustment screw that can basically articulate the entire arm and do your kind of zeroing and ranging of the needle accordingly there. It's good to have at least one of each of these at each precision barrel chambering station. Okay. And then we've got kind of gunsmithing and hand tools, right? These are going to be by my gunsmithing bench. A good barrel vise. We're using barrel vices from Short Action Customs. We've got the type with the opening top and then kind of the closed model, the Bravo. And they use the same inserts. You just wrap some drywall tape around a barrel, whether it be raw stainless or blued or Cerakoted, helps protect that barrel shank. And they absolutely have tremendous clamping power. I have gotten off some stubborn factory barrels with these barrel vices. And then action wrenches, we use a variety of styles. The Short Action Customs modular action wrench is great. It has different heads that are essentially inserts for different types and styles of actions, different brands of actions. They're good, I think, to somewhere around 100 foot-pounds or 125 foot-pounds of torque. And if we go above that, then we typically go with like an external style or potentially an internal blade style. It all depends on what the job is. Sometimes an action wrench like our Winchester Model 70 will work with a bunch of different actions because it's got a round feature on the top and then it kind of boxes around where your recoil lug would be or clamps up on the bottom of a flat bottom action and can be made to work really well. But just know that when you're planning a rifle job, it's not just about the reamers and gauges, it's about the action wrench and it's about any other disassembly that you're going to need to do. So punches, use those all the time. On the AR side, we got a lot of roll pin holders and roll pin punches, but on the bolt action side, mostly just typical drift punch style. Can be nice to have some brass punches in case you need non-marring, but usually I just use the carbon steel models, that sort of thing. Bunch more tools that we use, sockets, wrenches, and Allen keys, and so on and so forth, but I'm just assuming that's a part of your regular shop inventory of tooling. Okay, and then there's reamers, gauges, and bushings, right? For each chambering job, you're going to need at least one chambering reamer. A finisher is a good all-purpose, right? And that's typically what you use. If you're doing volume work, you're going to want to consider roughers. And then sometimes you can get separate reamers for the throat area and for the body and neck area and so on and so forth. Bushing sets. I would recommend that when you open your shop, you have bushing sets for 22 caliber, 6 millimeter, 6.5 millimeter, and 30 caliber at least, right? And each of these bushings is going to be something like a 9-piece set, so that if you're using an indicating rod or chambering reamer, you have the ability to fit to the specific bore in question, right? Each barrel that comes off the line at Bartline, for instance, might vary ever so slightly. And sometimes, especially when you're indicating with an indicating rod, that fit is super critical. Can't be too tight, you don't want to gouge the bore. Can't be too loose because you're not going to be able to indicate down to a high level of precision. And those indicating rods come in different lengths and different styles and all sorts of different ways to go. With chambering reamers in general, I personally think it's great to have all of the common calibers, right? For semi-spec reamers that you can just have on hand. Probably a 6.5 Creedmoor, right? A 30-06, a 308, and so on and so forth. You have to know your clientele and know what they're likely to want, whether they be target shooters or hunters or both. Okay, laser engraver. So this is really important. You need some way to engrave. Sure, you can use stamps and just hit it with a hammer, but I would highly recommend that you get a laser engraving machine that's capable of doing ATF compliant engraving when you open your rifle barrel shop. This is super, super important, right? It's gonna need to be somewhere in that 30 to 50 watt range. Ours is a 50 watt that we have down here at the shop. Great for Cerakote laser imaging as well. You can discolor or even burn through layers of Cerakote, and that can lead to some really great monetization opportunities. Here's an example of one of the barrels that we did ATF compliant engraving on. I believe it's about 0.08 of an inch deep. I actually checked that on the lathe, and it takes probably about a minute and a half total to burn all of the barrel details. Pretty cool. So we've talked about a lot, and we also have left a lot that we haven't talked about, right? We're not talking about training in books or facilities. In terms of costs, insurance and licensing, storage systems, benches and chests, Cerakote equipment isn't included here because it's not an absolute requirement to get started with. General shop tools, reamers and gauges, any CNC stuff, right? And all of this pricing that I worked out here is for just buying it brand new, right? You can always bargain shop. You can go to auctions, machine shops that are closing, all sorts of options for saving money here. But if you're running a business, I highly recommend that you don't waste too much time with some of that and just get down to business. So what I did was I looked at all of kind of the essential machinery, tooling, and supplies here, and I put together kind of a basic starter price range and then a premium price range. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you're just getting started, you could probably find a lathe for about $10,000 that'll work for you, right? As an example. And over on the premium side, you're going to spend at least $25,000 on a larger lathe that comes with the equipment that you're going to need to get going. And that is a very, very good investment to make. The machine is very important, right? So the total package for a total basic startup would be $23,000. This is a setup that you're going to be able to do good quality work with, right? It might take a little bit longer. You might have some of these trade-offs that you're going to have to just work through, right? If you're going to go premium per station, and this is lathe plus mill, you're going to be more in that $55,000 range. And some companies like Precision Matthews offer financing, which is awesome. That might be the way for you to get started if you don't have a lot of cash. You're just going to have to be careful and make sure that you can make all your expenses, including that payment for your equipment if you do go down that road, right? So this is not an exact list. Obviously, I've left some things off here. Every shop is going to be completely different, but hopefully this gives you kind of a ballpark idea of what it's going to cost to get your rifle barrel shop up and going. Okay, and I mentioned that we didn't include Cerakote in any of that. If you do want to add Cerakote to your shop, you're going to need some sort of media blaster, right? You're going to need to have aluminum oxide, 100 grit approximately, and that's going to blast the surface. It's going to create mechanical adhesion between the substrate, which would be like the rifle barrel, and the Cerakote product itself. You're going to need a prep area where you can do masking and you can do cleaning. That might include tanks to dunk barrels and actions and other parts in acetone. You're going to need a booth and spray guns. We run Built American equipment now. Built American is an awesome US-based company. We've got a discount code, UR5, where you can save 5% site-wide, right? So we use the DSBE 1500 booth, which you've seen in our recent videos. We have 2 of the BAE 200 ovens, which are Wi-Fi controlled. They're premium Cerakote oriented construction, including optional stainless interior, and a lot more affordable than some of the other industrial oven offerings on the market. Okay, so You're going to need some machinery and equipment here. You're going to need some supplies, and a part of the supplies are the Cerakote inventory itself, right? My recommendation to start, stock some common colors. You've got your graphite black, your FDE, your OD green, and so on and so forth. Carry 10 colors and give your customers that option. That way you can just turn and burn. Now, Cerakote is really good about shipping. Usually for us, we're not in a major city. They can get it to us in something like 2 days. Pretty amazing. And so that's not a huge problem as long as you've got good planning, but it's always going to save you money to just use your existing bottle of graphite black, right, for a black barrel and so on and so forth. If you are serious about doing Cerakote, I highly recommend the certified applicator training. I went for the basic training and then I went back about a year later for the advanced training, and it was worth the time. It was worth the investment. Absolutely. You meet some great people there. You just learn a ton about how to apply Cerakote and also about the business. So Cerakote is a great value add, right? And that concludes the video. And I wanted to come back to the Colorado School of Trades. We highly appreciate the partnership that we have with the school. We've been there, we're getting to know the students, and we absolutely believe in the program that they have in place. Again, I wish I could have gone there, right? So if you want to become a rifle gunsmith or a general gunsmith, schooloftrades.edu, check it out. You can call 303-233-4697 to talk to someone, an actual person, right? Also, don't forget OTM Tactical, UR5 code saves you 5%. Barrel blanks, actions, triggers, a lot of the stuff that you're going to need if you're going to put this type of business into motion. Here's what I'd like to know. Do you run a rifle barrel shop, a gunsmithing shop that does precision rifle builds, rebarreling, muzzle threading, that kind of thing? What do you think about kind of how I laid this out? Did I miss anything, right? Did I overinflate anything? Drop a comment and let me know what you think of this comprehensive list of knowledge, skills, machinery, and tools that you're going to need to start rebarreling rifles. I'm having a ton of fun with this. Every time I do one of these rifle barrel jobs, I come away feeling that feng shui awesome feeling. It's hard to describe. It's craftsmanship. It's visual progress. It's a challenge. I just absolutely love it. And I hope that you'll love it too if this is something that you decide to take up. And if you're looking for machinery, definitely check out Precision Matthews. That concludes this video, and that means it's time to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, where we've got unrestricted content, and Instagram. Make sure to follow us on all those channels. Ultimate Reloader also has a commercial solutions division serving law enforcement, the military, and the gun industry. We have some unique capabilities, including a comprehensive suite of recoil testing and evaluation capabilities, trigger profiling, and more. If you're interested in custom rifles like what we build here on the channel or gunsmithing services, you're going to want to go to rifles.ultimatereloader.com and get on the wait list. If you want to learn lucrative gunsmithing like what I show here on the channel, including building custom rifles and Cerakote plus a whole bunch more, you're going to want to check out the Colorado School of Trades, schooloftrades.edu. Thanks again for watching.